Okay, good evening, everyone. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I want to welcome you to Poets Translate Poets, which brings together 5 poet translators from Mexico and the United States to discuss poetry, the art of translation across English and Spanish. My name is Quentin Ring, and I am the executive director of Beyond Baroque. For those who don't know, we are a literary space located in Venice, California, and we are dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language through cultivating new writing and presenting contemporary literature and art. We are, in fact, Los Angeles' oldest literary institution, and we are continuing on through a historic pandemic. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their land. I also wanted to say a few words about Beyond Baroque and our ongoing programs. We offer a wide range of workshops and readings. This month we have our ongoing free workshops, which have helped launch the careers of writers and artists that range from the iconic LA poet Wanda Coleman to most recently America's youngest ever inaugural poet, Amanda Gorman. Right now, the poet Beth Ruscio is teaching our Wednesday night poetry workshop, which has been running continuously since 1969. Meanwhile, our Monday night fiction workshop started up again this week with Raquel Baker. Both Raquel and Beth are really excellent writers and workshop leaders. So anyone who is interested in an online workshop at the moment, I would encourage you to check those out. We'll also be announcing a slate of more workshops as well as readings, performances, talks in the near future. So do stay tuned for those. I should say also, we very much appreciate any donations you can make as part of this evening. You'll find a link in the chat, or you can go to our website. COVID-19 has been truly challenging for many arts organizations. Beyond Baroque is no exception to that. We still don't know when we'll be able to reopen. So any amount you're able to donate helps us sustain ourselves throughout the pandemic. I should say also, please do buy our featured authors, poets, translators books. We'll have a link to those available in the chat. Really, please do support the work that they do and their publishers as well. So let's focus on tonight's program. I should say, to start, first, thank you to Ramon Garcia, Mariana Zara, and Gloria Vando for helping put this program together. Also, thank you to Jimmy Vega for running our Zoom and handling coordination of all the logistics. As a space in the community, Beyond Baroque is dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language. And as such, we're especially interested in translation and the way poetic meaning moves across languages. Given Los Angeles' place at the crossroads of English and Spanish, we're especially eager to host programming that thinks about poetry in both languages. I was just saying to our participants earlier, it's an unexpected benefit of this pandemic we're in and the enforced pandemic enforced closure that we're enduring, that we're able actually to offer transnational programming that puts local writers in touch with our colleagues in Mexico and across the world. So that's it's really special to have them here with us. So we're joined this evening by 3 accomplished poet translators from Mexico, Elisa Díaz Castelo, Elsa Cross, and Jorge Ortega. And we also have 2 Los Angeles-based poet translators, Anthony Seidman and David Shook. Each poet will read one of their translations of a poem by another poet, and they will also read one of their own poems. They'll also have an opportunity to say a few words about their translation, about which bits of language were interesting or difficult to translate, and the relationship of the work they translated to their own poetry. At the end of the program, we'll make some room for questions. Feel free to pose questions if you have them in the chat for our participants. Perhaps too, they might have some questions for each other. So we'll just see if a little conversation evolves towards the end of the program. I did want to say also, when you put a question in the chat, please make sure that it goes to all panelists and participants if you'd like everyone to see it. And so I think without further ado, we should go ahead and start the program. We're going to start with Elisa Diaz Castelo. She has published the poetry books Principia and El Reino de lo No Lineal. She was awarded the 2020 Aguascalientes Fine Arts Poetry Prize, the 2017 Alonso Vidal National Poetry Prize. She also received, as a translator, the 2019 Fine Arts Prize for Literary Translation for her translation of Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong. She has a master's degree in creative writing from New York University and has been awarded fellowships by the Mexican National Fund for Culture and the Arts, the Foundation for Mexican Letters, and the Fulbright Foundation. So Elisa, if you wouldn't mind taking us away. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Quentin. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be talking about translation, which is one of my great passions and which really has helped me become a better poet, I think. So yes, I would like to talk about my experience translating Ocean Vuong's work, and perhaps starting with the way I first met him, which was during my master's degree at NYU, and he was also there. We never took any classes together, but my other classmates always talked to me about his work. So that's how I came in contact with him and with his work. And I realized, I don't know, I was astonished by the mere newness of what he was writing. It seemed that he was at once very intimate and also in a way archetypal. So I really admire the way he channels the mythical through the personal, which I think is very difficult. And it's also one of my main concerns when I'm writing. I really care about the mythical. And so I admire the way he was doing it. And that's why I started translating his work. It felt very different to anything I'd read before, but in a way it also felt very attuned to tradition. I would say one of the things I really learned in translating Ocean is the way he uses the sentence as a unit of sense. I feel like I had always considered before attending the masters at NYU that the steering axle of the poem was not was the metaphor or the image. And with his poetry and other works I read during my master's degree, I realized that the sentence could also be one of the steering axles of poetry, and not everything has to revolve around metaphor. And I admire the way he uses sentences which seem very surprising but very different to one another, and by juxtaposing them he creates something absolutely new and different, and a new sense comes out of that. I think one of the challenges, or the main challenge I encountered, beyond the fact that he uses very colloquial language, and that's always kind of difficult to translate or to transfer into another language, the way he uses line breaks was my main concern, because in the English tradition, there's this use of line breaks which does not respect the syntactical structure of the sentence. And in modern poetry in Spanish, usually line breaks obey the syntactical structure. So if there's a comma, that's probably where the line break is going to happen, or a period. And in English, it doesn't work that way. And that really helps to make, to splinter meaning into different possible meanings, right? If there's a sentence that is broken halfway through, the first part of the sentence can mean something totally different than when the sentence is read completely all the way through the end. And so that's really difficult to transfer into Spanish, because Spanish works in this way where verbs depend so much, conjugation is so structured around pronouns, and well, verbs are so precise that it's difficult to achieve this polyvalence of meaning. And usually when I translate it, I have to tie it down to a single subject, the verb. So that was my main difficulty when translating Ocean's work, because he really explodes this this characteristic of English. So I was thinking of reading one poem by Ocean translated into Spanish, and then one of my poems translated into English. I will begin with Ocean's poem, which is called Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong. Algún día amaré a Ocean Vuong. Ocean, no tengas miedo. El final del camino está tan adelante que ya lo dejamos atrás. No te preocupes. Tu padre solo es tu padre hasta que alguno de los dos lo olvide. Así como tu columna no recordará sus alas, sin importar cuántas veces nuestras rodillas besen el pavimento. Ocean, ¿me escuchas? La parte más hermosa de tu cuerpo es donde sea que caiga la sombra de tu madre. Aquí está la casa con la niñez reducida a una cerca de alambre rojo. No te preocupes, solo llama al horizonte y nunca la alcanzarás. Aquí está hoy, salta, te prometo que no es un bote salvavidas. Aquí está el hombre con brazos lo suficientemente amplios para abarcar tu partida. Y aquí el momento, justo después de apagar las luces, en el que aún puedes ver la antorcha débil entre sus piernas, cómo la usas una y otra vez para encontrar tus propias manos. Pediste una segunda oportunidad y te han dado una boca donde vaciarte. No tengas miedo, los disparos son solo el sonido de la gente tratando de vivir un poco más y fracasando. Ocean, Ocean, levántate. La parte más hermosa de tu cuerpo es a donde se dirige. Y recuerda, incluso la soledad es tiempo que pasas con el mundo. Aquí está el cuarto con todos adentro. Tus amigos muertos atravesando, tu cuerpo como el aire que atraviesa las campanas de viento. Aquí un escritorio con una pata coja y un ladrillo que la sostiene. Sí, aquí hay un cuarto tan cálido y sanguíneo que, te juro, al despertar vas a creer que estas paredes son de piel. So this is my version of Ocean's poem in Spanish, and I was thinking of reading a translation of my poem into English by Keith Schlatter, which is a great translator, and I'm really happy to have this poem in English in his words. It's called Sola dosis facit venenum. Almost anything can kill you over time and in certain amounts. For example, parsley, the domesticated cousin of hemlock, nutmeg, hallucinogenic, and cayenne pepper, which thins the blood. Anything, even the sweetest thing, has its murderous underbelly. The dose makes the poison. For example, water, purified with iodine and oxygen itself, yes, even the air that lets us live is also eroding us bit by bit. It's true. You can die from water, from air, sleep. There's no way not to drift, and slowly we all kill ourselves in our own way. But it couldn't be any different. It's necessary for each thing to avenge itself, for every life to assure its own annihilation. We sleep side by side. Sometimes our breath and step, sometimes my body is almost yours. We coincide. We possessed every last inch of the other. We look without curiosity or diligence. We look for our memories and hand them over without nostalgia. We share everything, and maybe it's too much. We've begun the mutual killing. They're rotting our sickly sweet words at breakfast, and at night we talk of sad things, and we know each other's every last nook and cranny, like an old house. In the end, maybe it will feel like losing ourselves, little by little, day by day, to die in and for the other, though without drama or relish. But if not, then how and what? To lighten the dose now would be absurd. Best to follow, step by step, the bumbling useless manual of endless love. Right, so yeah, this is my own poem. And well, with this, I think I am done. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to participate in this and looking forward to hear everyone else.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elisa. That was fantastic. I love that. I love the discussion of Ocean's poetry as well. What a poet.
Great.
So we had a question in the chat about translators using computer-assisted translation. I'm just going to say to Maria Elena, who asked that we'll just hold the question until the end of the program, and we can when everybody can answer those. But next up, we have Anthony Seidman. Anthony's recent collections of poetry are entitled A Sleepless Man Sits Up in Bed and Cosmic Weather. His translations include For Love of the Dollar, a portrait of the artist as an undocumented immigrant, which is by Mexican gonzo journalist J.M. Servin. Also A Stab in the Dark by Facundo Bernal, and Smooth Talking Dog, poems by Roberto Castillo Uriarte. Seidman was a contributing editor for Dispatches from the Poetry Wars, and he currently helps curate translation features for Caesura. His work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. So I'm very pleased to welcome Anthony Seidman to the program tonight. Take us away.
Thank you very much. What an honor to be here. And thank you to all the organizers, and Quentin, to you, and to Mariano Saro, and to, of course, to Ramon Garcia as well. So the first thing is I'm going to be reading a poem by a Dominican poet named Homero Pumaral. And I think the importance of why I chose this translation was that there is a paradigm of literature that is considered of importance in Latin America. Many translations come from Mexico, from Argentina, from Chile, etc. Yet there are other countries that seem to be existing on the margins of interest, of scholarly interest, and of translators' interest. And definitely one of those countries would be the Dominican Republic, which I think is quite ironic in that it gave us perhaps one of the most important intellectuals of the 20th century, Pedro Enriquez Ureña, who was a close friend of Alfonso Reyes, a close friend of Borges, who was really the teacher of poets like Julio Torri and Salvador Novo in Mexico City when he was residing there after the Mexican Revolution. And he was kind of appointed by Vasconcelos to, in a sense, to inaugurate the new mission of Mexican education. Pumaral is very interesting in that the sense of play in his poetry, of pop culture, is omnipresent. The presence of English language words is something that is that continues throughout the poems. The poems echo songs by Lou Reed, songs by Simon Garfunkel, poetry by William Carlos Williams, at the same time that they're deeply enriched, entrenched in the poetry of Santo Domingo, of the Dominican Republic. So the poem I'll be reading is from a new book I just published by Sweet and Dweevil called Caribbean Ants. And the title was originally in Spanish. It was called Caribbean Ants. And I will just read the version in English. And I did take some liberties with this in order to talk about the process of translating. It is filled with Dominican slang, which is very different from that of Mexico. I'm more familiar with Spanish from the north of Mexico than I am with that of the Antilles. So the word you will hear will be Sankey Pankies, which means basically gigolos who try to seduce and live off of Western tourists reaching the island of Santo Domingo. And then, of course, there's the tradition of the fighting cocks, fighting cockerels, etc. And I translated hormiguero, which is more or less like an anthill, as an ant swarm. Excuse me for making that liberty. So here we go. Caribbean ants. One imagines the Caribbean, an ant swarm devouring the Antilles, and the Antilles as bottles of different sizes conserving all of the world's rum. And the world like a baseball soaring over the roofs of Boston. And Boston is the image that satellites transmit when Big Papi slowly jogs past second base, waving to the bleachers, caressing the infield with his cleats. And the cleats are Puma brand skiffs, carrying 4,000 undocumented travelers, scoffing at gringo Coast Guard radars from Borinquin and back to Borinquin by way of Michigan or New York. And everyone has a cousin in the Mona Passage. And one Mona Isle is a rooster used for training fighting cockerels. In Baibe Beach, for example, there is a cockerel discotheque where the cockerels dance beneath a disco ball. and tourists dance with spurs while splattering feathers and blood, and the cockerels place bets on the tourists, and the tourists fall in love with the cockerels, and in the end, there's a dead cockerel or tourist, and a tourist gets married with a winning cockerel, which all has to do with enormous waves of sankey-pankies sliding down the back of a European or gringo family, and with enormous waves of 1970s engines rising over highways of beans and rice among Caribbean ants and bottles of rum. So that was the first poem by this book by Homero Pumaron, one of the more interesting poets from the Caribbean, who is now currently writing. And then I will, if you permit myself, I will read a poem. Wait, if I can do this, how do I do this? 1 second. It's going to take me 1 second. I'm going to be reading a poem from Sulfur Surrealist Jungle, a wonderful online journal, just like Sejera, published by Georgia Stravopoulou, which contains poems by Patrick Lawler, Ken Johnson, Heller Levinson, Will Alexander, some of the best poets now writing in English, in my opinion. So this is my poem that I wrote. This is a poem called Liner Notes to Forgotten Classic Rock LP. That winter, we slept on the dark side of the sun, where it's always blustery. We fed the fireplace remaining wood. Then we burned encyclopedias and Christmas sweaters, even dreidels. Wolves licked the windows and peered, their red coal gaze into our coterie of astronomers who believed in alchemy and astrologists who believed in gravity. And when someone, could it be the ghost of insomnia, knocked on the door, we hushed one another in our cabin. Pines tumbled further and further away until we could only hear the black clouds knitting an impending blizzard. And then Balding Bob, the specialist in Titan's organic compounds, or Pundit Paula, the cheerleader for Anthropocene disco, would crack open another brewski and belch and say, "Où sont les neiges d'antan?" The Victrola was cranked, and Sheik of Araby crackled, and Betsy Bow, the limber lady dating from the 1930s, would hop and diddy and dollar whilst dragging her clubfoot. And it was then that I knew I had better search for my namesake and leave that snowy latitude on the sun. And so I trudged across permafrost. I fell into ditches of slush, revealing plenty of bones. Mastodons rose over the hills slowly, such thunder in their strain, as Hart Crane said. Twice, I was almost mauled by smiling polar bears, but they stepped on thinning ice patches and plunged into the frigid depths where the magnetic gaze of sharks are known to suck the strength from iron, until I descended into a scalding valley, sands, sirocco's, camels, merchants, date groves, and I reached the place I had sought. And it was, as you may say, satisfactory. My brothers, all sandals and beard, exited from his hut, and said he had waited a lifetime hibernating inside a vial of olive oil. And so he placed his hands on my burning hair, and everything smelled of burning coal. Dogs commenced barking. A woman bathed in a tub of beer, and I felt the ground beneath my soles combust, turn to liquid fire, and lo and behold, imagination returned to surfing the solar cowabunga, so full of pepper, over there where bullets melt in your mouth, but not sweeter than Jane, for she's the one who melts in your hands. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Anthony. That was spectacular. I loved it. So next up, we have Elsa Cross. Elsa has published numerous books in Mexico and other countries. These include her collected poetry, 1964 to 2012, as well as Atrapasueños, Insomnio, Nepantla, and Libro de Horas. The last decade, she has been awarded prizes that include the Roger Caillois Prize, the Fine Arts Medal, the Poet State Prize, the National Prize for Arts and Literature, which is the highest literary distinction awarded in Mexico, and the 2019 Ramon Lopez Velarde Ibero-American Award. She has a PhD in philosophy from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, where she's a full professor of philosophy of religion. She has also published several essay books on Indian poetry, art, and thought, and has also published several translations of poetry. So everyone, please welcome Elsa Cross. Thank you so much for being here, Elsa.
Thanks to you. I'm very happy to be here and participate in this meeting, and hi to Forrest Gander and Daniel Bell and other friends here. I will read the text. I hope my English is not too bad. On this event with the title Poets Translate Poets, I'd like to render an homage to John Oliver Seidman in the 3rd anniversary of his passing away. I feel he's one of the great American poets of the last 50 years, but I fear his work has not yet received due recognition. He may have written around 30 books of poems, as well as many translations and essays. I met John in 1985, maybe in his first trip to Mexico, in a poetry reading, and since then, for 2 decades, he kept coming back almost every year during his summer vacations, and later on, he also extended his travels to the south of the continent. These were registered in his book, Caminante, whose title comes from 2 famous lines by Spanish poet Antonio Machado. Caminante, no hay camino, se hace camino al andar, which John used as an epigraph and translated as, traveler, there is no path, you make the path as you walk. Written in English in spite of the title, the book starts in the south of Mexico and ends in Medellin, Colombia, with stops on many places of Central and South America, all the way down to Chile. About this book, Gary Snyder said, "This is a major poem, gritty and elegant, hard-earned, oriented by the stars and late-night conversations on the long road. John weaves his poems," adds Snyder, "like an old-time Chinese poet while traveling a continent." Not only did John write a lot in every travel to Mexico or elsewhere, he also met with many writers and translated at least 50 Latin American poets, from Gonzalo Rojas to very young and unknown authors. And many of us also translated John's poems into Spanish. In Mexico, 3 books by him were published. Son Caminos, with an introduction by Juvenal Acosta, and translations by him, as well as poets Alberto Blanco, Luis Cortés Bargalló, Sandro Cohen, who just passed away in Mexico City, myself, and a few others. The second book was Tragasol, and finally, Translations of Light, a weird volume shared with Vacantes and other poems by myself, entirely translated by John, and both parts are bilingual. And this is what I intend to present here, my translation of one of John's poem, and a poem of mine translated by him. He said in an interview, "My chats with poets from East Oakland to Tierra del Fuego were my graduate school in the language. My work as a translator reminds me that writing is essentially about service. My teachers are the poets I translate. My own poetry increasingly fits within the country of my skin." This is why his travels were, as well as his poems, so rich. He was committed to the places he went, to the people he met, not only as a poet, but as a human being. Maybe one who can maintain the openness of an apprentice becomes a true master in his trade, whatever it may be. I'd like to read now John Oliver Simon's poem, Dreaming, in Spanish, first in English and then in my translation, from the book Translations of Light. The poem may reflect not the dream, but the nightmare Spanish became sometimes for John. I'm sure learning all the Spanish subjunctive verb tenses must be a real nightmare for anyone who studies the language. Dreaming in Spanish. For a gringo, to dream in Spanish is to forget your life because it has been written in a code you no longer understand. It is to reach far back on the green shelves of the tiny grocery for forms of the imperfect subjunctive which no longer exist. It is to wander the labyrinths of some devastated global city where malevolent drifters set up abode among demonic beasts. It is to talk to men whose tongues are cobblestones, to love with a whole heart someone who forgot your name. It is to follow the tents of the human caravan and ride out of town on jingling horses, mare and stallion, each one according to the will of God. The dream sinks down beneath the borders, and you're stranded in the city of the dawn. Soñar en español. Para un gringo, soñar en español es olvidar la vida porque ha sido escrita en un código que ya no comprendes. Es retroceder a los estantes verdes de los pequeños abarrotes, buscando formas de subjuntivo imperfecto que ya no existen. Es errar por los laberintos de alguna ciudad global devastada, donde vagos malévolos se han instalado entre bestias demoníacas. Es hablar con hombres cuyas lenguas son adoquines, amar con todo el corazón a alguien que ha olvidado tu nombre. Es plegar la tienda de la caravana humana y salir del pueblo cabalgando en caballos tintineantes, yegua y garañón, cada uno según la voluntad de Dios. El sueño se hunde más abajo de las fronteras y tú quedas varado en la ciudad del alba. And I read now the first poem of my book, Vacantes, first in Spanish and then in John Oliver Simon's translation. En la fuente nos hemos sumergido. A su corriente dejamos nuestros cuerpos como bancos errantes, tierra que se desprende llevándose la orilla de espadañas. Fluimos por sus transparencias y en el fondo de ese lecho nuestras piernas rozaban un musgo suave. Plantas se enredaban a los pies. Sentíamos el paso de esos peces que a un descuido, decían, se pegaban entre los muslos de las mujeres. Y todo el tiempo una frase en los oídos, pulsando al límite sus cadencias más altas. Río abajo veíamos las ramas contra el cielo. El sol dibujaba en nuestros cuerpos la sombra de las hojas. La brisa traía tu olor. Pasamos bajo un sauce y sus ramas detenían de los cabellos todo ese impulso río abajo. We plunged into the spring. We gave our bodies to the current like wandering shores, land coming loose, carrying along the rushy bank. We flowed through its transparency, and our legs rubbed a smooth moss in the stream bed. Plants tangled around our feet. We felt those fishes passing, which, if you're not careful, they say, get stuck between a woman's thighs. And all the time, hearing one phrase pulls him to the limit of its highest cadence. Downriver, we saw branches against the sky. The sun drew the shadow of the leaves on our bodies. The breeze carried your odor. We passed beneath a willow, and its branches caught all that downriver impulse by the hair. Thank you so much.
Marvelous. Thank you, Elsa. What a pleasure that was. Next up, we have David Shook. David is a poet, translator, and editor whose translations include Mario Ballatin's Beauty Salon, which is forthcoming in the fall of this year, and Jorge Eduardo Elsin's Room in Rome, a finalist for the 2020 PEN Award for Poetry and Translation and 2020 National Translation Award. Their poetry film, A Barcode Scanner, shot in the Chemisko IDP camp in northern Iraq, was recently awarded the prize for the best film for tolerance by the 2020 Zebra Poetry Film Festival in Berlin. Everyone, please welcome David Shook. Thank you so much for being here, David.
Thank you, Quentin, and thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, Ramon, for this invitation. It's really cool to be here, and I think one of the things that's great about online events is how many friends I see from around the world, people from LA, from Van Nuys, the Jewel of the Valley, from the Canary Islands, like Elsa, Mexico City, Iraq. Everybody's here, and that's really exciting to me. I'm going to start by reading a poem by the Peruvian poet and visual artist Jorge Eduardo Elsin. When we were asked how our translations affected our own poetry, I've really puzzled over that for the last week because in a sense, I think I'm a little too close to both to see the influence. I know that I've learned a lot from the poets I've translated. I actually feel an immense debt of gratitude to those writers, both alive and dead. And at the same time, I can't really put my finger on specific ways in which they have affected my own writing. The reason I chose the poem I'm going to read from Jorge Eduardo Elsin's collection, Room in Rome, which was published by Cardboard House Press, and I just dropped a link in the chat for everyone. But the reason I chose this and the poem I chose of my own to read tonight is because they're both very grounded in place. This poem in Rome, my own in Los Angeles, and that's what ties them together. I think the effect in Room in Rome over the course of the book, the city of Rome really, it begins as a backdrop for these poems and becomes as much a character or even protagonist as anyone else, including the poet himself. And my poem is about LA that I'm going to read tonight, but my first book, Our Obsidian Tongues, is really a book about Mexico City, and really a book-length poem as I consider it about the city. So location is something I'm really interested in, and cities in particular are something I'm really interested in. Here is Jorge Eduardo Elsin's poem, Roman Forum. Every morning when I wake up, the sun seethes steady in the sky. The café con leche steams in the kitchen. I ask my companion, how many hours did I sleep? But no one answers me. I open my eyes and my arms looking for support. I touch my wooden table and the night falls violently. A bolt of lightning blows out the light of the sun, like the light of a candle. I ask again, does the centuries-old café con leche still steam up from the dust? But no one answers me. In the darkness, I get up and drink it, but I realize that the milk is frozen and the burning coffee rests like petroleum several miles beneath the earth. A silent column collapses in my arms, turned into ash. The sun brusquely rises again and rapidly sets in a storm of leaves and reddish birds. Inside my bedroom, the dusk shines for an instant with its 4 golden chairs in the corners. I try to remember my childhood with my hands. I draw trees and birds in the air like an idiot. I whistle songs from 1,000 years ago. But another column of ashes collapses in my arms, and my hands drop covered in sudden wrinkles. Now the water in the sink clearly reminds me of my first baths in the river. Vague noises, naked scents, wind, mud-caked hogs beneath the orange tree's shade. Might my memory be as immortal as your body when you undress before me? You're nothing but a slab of marble, mountain of dust, column, clock of ash, bone on bone that time hurls in my eyes. Do I not perhaps remember the last hours of the night when I kissed you, furious on my iron cot, like I was kissing a cadaver? I ask my companion, my fast love, amor mío, velocísimo. How much time has passed since then? How many hours? How many centuries have I slept without contemplating you? But no one answers me. I'll read my poem now. It's called LA Elegies. And those who are familiar with Brecht might remember his poems about Hollywood from early in his exile. his Hollywood Elegies are one of my favorite poems about the city of LA. Of course, one of my other favorite poets who commonly writes about the city is here with us tonight, Anthony. So Anthony, I put you alongside Brecht and I read these 5 LA elegies. 1. The city is a microwave at 50% power. Nothing pops with heat, but joggers ooze perfume. 2. The butt ends of AC units perch on window frames like fat robotic gargoyles, drip sweat onto the jasmine. 2 drunks sleep in the Triangle Park, sweat through coats 10 seasons old. They snore in shifts, guard shopping carts, rich with the weekend's cans. 3. A sealed semi sits abandoned on a westbound highway shoulder. In its trailer, 40 corpses, children puckered like pale prunes. A pity, says the LA Times. Imagine their dreams. This one janitor, this one nanny, this one cook. Some other truck barrels toward LA with better ventilation. Some other corpses will soon send money home. 4. The sperm trees spew chlorine. The popsicle pusher chimes his bells. Buses slink like slugs down Sunset, and summer drones on for half the year. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Very excited to check out Room in Rome, actually. It's new to me as well. So next up, we have our final poet translator of the evening, Jorge Ortega. Jorge has published 10 books of poetry in Mexico, Argentina, Spain, Canada, and Italy, including Estado del Tiempo, Devoción por la Piedra, and Guía de Forasteros. He has a doctorate in Hispanic literature from the University of Barcelona and was awarded the 2001 Tijuana National Poetry Prize, the 2010 Jaime Sabines International Poetry Prize. His poems and articles have appeared in recognized literary and cultural media in Latin America, the English-speaking world. In addition to English, his poetic work has been translated into Chinese, German, Portuguese, French, and Italian, and is part of multiple anthologies of recent Mexican poetry. He has translated poems by William Carlos Williams, Hart Crane, T.S. Eliot, Kenneth Rexroth, and Anthony Seidman into Spanish. Jorge, thanks so much for being here, and please go ahead.
Well, last but not least, hello to each and every one of you, including those who have the generosity to listen to us. I am glad to share the screen tonight with beloved and admired poets to whom I am attached by friendship and poetry, the brotherhood of poetry. Thanks also in advance to the friends of Beyond Baroque, Quentin, Ramon, and Jimmy for for organizing this multicultural reading about the translation of poetry and for allowing me to be a part of it. I will read in Spanish my translation of the first fragment of the Bernarton, the beginning of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, a poem widely translated in the Hispanic world by poets such as Jose Maria Valverde and Jose Emilio Pacheco recently. It is a central poem in my experience as a reader. I discovered it for the first time when I was 16 years old, and I wanted to give a special place to that original experience and share today my translation of that poetic moment. To be honest, this fragment of what is perhaps Eliot's most cardinal poem has offered me no difficulty. I prefer it for the evocative simplicity of its images and the universality of its language. In fact, I think that the challenge of the four quartets poetry consists of knowing how to dose the temptation to recreate the poem in order to achieve a decent translation without it being exactly the same one that other translators have made. The theme of this first part of Burn Norton is personal memory, the last thing we have in these uncertain and lonely times of pandemics. If the four quartets have any influence on me, it is the human and reflective character of the passage of time and the perenniality of images of memory embodied in an evanescent materiality. Por Norton. Tiempo presente y tiempo pasado están quizá presentes en el tiempo futuro y el tiempo futuro en el tiempo pasado. Si todo tiempo es un presente eterno, todo el tiempo es irredimible. Lo que pudo haber sido es mera abstracción y su perpetua posibilidad única en un orden de presuposiciones. Lo que pudo haber sido y lo que fue apunta a un solo fin, siempre presente. Eco de pisadas en la memoria, por el pasillo que no elegimos, hacia la puerta que jamás abrimos y desemboca en el rosedal. Mis palabras retumban así en tu mente. Pero ¿con qué motivo remover el polvo en un tazón de pétalos de rosa? No lo sé. Otros murmullos habitan el jardín. ¿Lo seguiremos? Rápido, rápido, dijo el pájaro. Encuéntralos, encuéntralos. Al doblar la esquina, por el primer cancel de un mundo primigenio, ¿seguiremos el engaño del tordo? En ese mundo primigenio, ahí estaban, dignos, invisibles, vagando sin agobio sobre las hojas muertas, en el calor de otoño, por el aire vibrante, y el pájaro trinó en respuesta a la sigilosa música escondida en la maleza, y el fulgor de un atisbo atravesó la escena, pues las rosas tenían la apariencia de flores admiradas. Ahí estaban como nuestros huéspedes, aceptados y aceptando. Entonces nos movimos y ellos formalmente a lo largo de la senda desierta rumbo al centro del huerto, para mirar al fondo de la alberca drenada. Seca la alberca, el cemento seco, bordes terrosos, y se llenó de agua de luz solar la alberca, y los lotos brotaron en silencio, en silencio. Brilló la superficie en el corazón de la luz, y allí estaban detrás de nosotros, reflejados en la alberca. Luego pasó una nube y se vació la alberca. Huyan, dijo el pájaro, porque las hojas estaban rebosantes de niños, ocultos y animados, conteniendo la risa. Muévase, muévanse, dijo el pájaro. La humanidad no puede soportar demasiada realidad. Tiempo pasado y tiempo presente, lo que pudo haber sido y lo que fue, apunta a un solo fin, siempre presente. And having said that, and to conclude my participation, I will read a poem of mine in its original version, Spanish, and then in English, translated by Anthony Seidman. Magisterio de signos. El cielo es un enorme silabario, un vasto pizarrón de agua compacta, donde aviones y pájaros escriben la efímera sentencia de su vuelo. Las nubes amalgaman un dialecto de vocablos errantes que la brisa impulsa o desvanece cada tarde como pasar la hoja del cuaderno. Tomamos clase viendo para arriba. Lo fugitivo esconde algún ejemplo de libertad o incitación al viaje dictado por el caracol del viento. La noche deja escombros en la altura, sublimes rocas, moles vaporosas que ofrecen la lectura de su cuerpo a cambio de un tributo, la vigilia. And now the same poem in English, Magister of Signs, with an epigraph of Venezuelan poet Eugenio Montejo. In vain, I stay awake decoding the world's alphabet. This poem could be assumed as a metaphor of the act of translation. The sky is a vast syllabary, a great chalkboard of compact water, where aeroplanes and birds inscribe the fleeting sentence of their flight. The clouds amalgamate a dialect from errant vocables that the breeze steers or dissipates each evening, like a finger turning the page of a journal. We attend class by looking above. Something fugitive hides an example of liberty or an invitation to a voyage dictated by the wind's shell. Night leaves rubble in the heavens, sublime boulders and vaporous mazes that offer the reading of its body in exchange for tribute, keeping vigil. Thanks for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you so much for that. I loved it. So I think we have a little time now to take some questions, have a little bit of a conversation if people have some questions they'd like to ask. If I could ask all the participants maybe just to come back on camera for a little bit, and we can sort of switch to gallery view for a little bit of a discussion. And we can just start with a few questions. Again, thank you everyone. Thank you all to all our poets and translators for this. It's been a real pleasure. I think there was one question that we started with in the very beginning, which was, do you use computer assisted technology in your translations at all? Just as a start, or is it all from starts with you rather than with the computer?
For poetry, I don't really, although I quite often use online dictionaries now because they're quite good, especially for Spanish English. But there's a novel, an autobiographical novel I translated a few years ago that was divided in 3 sections. And I translated the third section with Google Translate. And this was maybe 2015 or so, 2016 maybe. And of course, I edited it to make it fit the rest of the book, more or less. No one ever noticed. You guys are among the 50 people who now know that secret. But it turned out to be a lot more work at that point. Google Translate keeps getting better and better. I actually really love Google Translate. I think it's a really useful tool. But I think we're going to need translators like Elsa and Anthony for a good while longer, especially for poetry. And yeah, I never admitted to that secret because I was planning to write an essay about it, and time got away from me a bit. So maybe I'll turn back to it one day.
Thank you, David. Others of you?
Well, I've never really used any computer generated translation device for translating, but I have used it for writing my own work, which is something I do when I'm beginning to write. I kind of translate it to many languages, back and forth, and that really makes the meaning become completely different and kind of reverts the original meaning of what I was trying to write. So it really helps as a tool for writing for me rather than translating.
Great, wonderful, thank you. I should say too to our audience, we owe a special thanks to Elisa just for being here. She's actually in Spain, so it's very late in Spain right now. So, you know, thank you for staying with us this whole time. We have another question that was a little bit earlier in the chat. Someone asked about translating English to from languages that have gender. The gender of words is important in the poem. Does anybody have anything to say about that? So Spanish to English, you know, the gendered pronouns, so on and so forth.
I feel it must be more difficult for someone translating from Spanish into other language than at least translating from English. I feel it's a lot easier than from other languages. And I don't want to imagine how it is from German, that has also a neuter gender. Neuter, I don't know how to pronounce. That
Yeah,
must be crazy.
Yeah. Anybody else? We have a question for Elisa, actually. Will you say something about how you worked with Ocean while translating his work? Is he familiar with Spanish? Did he comment on your drafts?
Yeah, well, I worked with him very closely because we constantly emailed back and forth, but he is not, he doesn't speak Spanish, but I often wrote to him and asked him, what did you mean exactly by this? Or is it this or rather this other thing? Or what would you prefer if you had to choose one meaning rather than the other? And it was amazing because many times as translators, we're translating work from dead poets and then we can't really ask them anything. So working with Ocean was great in that sense because I could really get a sense of what he perhaps preferred, if he preferred one thing over another, or what he actually meant, which is something we don't really have normally as translators or as readers. So it was an amazing experience. I was thinking about the question regarding gender pronouns, and I don't think I came upon that problem or that issue as much with Ocean's work, but I did. There was this word he used. It was cock-clit. That's like an invented word. That's kind of like it makes both sexual organs come together into like a new sexual organ and a new word. And I remember I really struggled translating that word into something that worked in Spanish as well. And I remember I worked with Hernán Bravo Varela, a translator I really admire, and we came upon this term pitoris, which is kind of pito, which means cock, and the ending from clitoris, and we created that word, pitoris. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Elisa. We have a question for David, actually. David, you said location is something very important to you. How do you think your location influences the way you can translate a poem? How close do you feel you have to be to the cultural background of the poet that you're translating?
That's a great question. I think on the one hand that one of the magical things about translation is the distances it can transport us. And at the same time, I think the more connected I am to the poets and their places that I translate, the better equipped I am to do so. And I've been very fortunate with many of the poets I translate to visit them where they're from. And of course, I think this too varies from poet to poet. You know, I actually think for a poet like Anthony, for example, it would be really important to know LA fairly well, and maybe even to know the Valley fairly well. I was actually thinking as Anthony was reading his own poem tonight, how impossible that poem would be to translate into Spanish. And I sometimes think that poet translators' poetry is among the most difficult to translate. I don't know if that's intentional or some sort of subconscious impulse, Anthony, but other poets, it may be less important. I think, I mean, in my own case, probably the most extreme example is actually a woman, Conceição Lima, who is from the islands of São Tomé and Príncipe in West Africa, who writes in Portuguese. And I won a grant from the NEA a few years ago to translate her selected works. And her poetry is so grounded in place. So much of it has to do with these tiny islands that have a population of under 200,000 people, despite being their own nation state. And in that instance, I really felt like I needed to be there. I needed to see it in order to translate it. And, you know, I was very fortunate in that I had a grant to underwrite that and could do so. But I think it really varies from poet to poet in my experience. My own poetry, I think, is pretty grounded in place, whether it's a place I'm visiting and it's the kind of strangeness of the place in a way that some of Gabriela Mistral's poetry, including her Mujer Extraña, sometimes reminds me of, or if it's a very familiar place like the Los Angeles of those elegies I read.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. I have a question for Elsa. Elsa, for all your time in the UK, does it affect your English in the way that, say, a US translator finds difficulties between Mexican Spanish and Spanish from Spain? I think you're on mute. Elsa, I think you're on mute, Elsa. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have never lived in the UK. I have only been 4 days in London in all my life. I don't know how many times I've been to Paris or Madrid or Rome, but not in the UK, unfortunately. But it has happened that way. And something you were saying about differences between the Spanish in Spain and Latin America or Mexico, there are many differences. And I think that's something one should keep in mind. Sometimes even while writing, because there are in Mexico so many Mexicanisms, I could say Aztecisms, or words that come from Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and that bear no meaning outside Mexico. So, and they have many synonyms that could be used instead, and that would help to make a poem clear, as long as it is not a poem that requires absolutely that use of words from there. I have some poems that I couldn't change those words, no matter who can or not understand them.
Great. Thank
I answered what you were asking.
No, I think so. I mean, it was a question from our audience. I think it was from not sure who it was from, to be honest. But there was sort of a related question for you also, or for anyone else. Do you have any rules about translating Spanish that is not that is from a particular region that you're not from? Perhaps Anthony and David might like.
I don't get it. What is it that you're?
Do you have any rules? I'm trying to interpret the question here. Do you have any rules about translating Spanish that is from a particular region that you are not from?
But I'm not translating Spanish in
right.
particular language.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why we're shifting the question to the larger group. If there's anybody who wants to jump in there.
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, I'd like to talk about that. I mean, generally for many years, the capital of what was considered to be culture in Mexico was that of Mexico City. Jose Vasconcelos went so far as to say where they start grilling beef or doing carne asada up north, that's where culture ceases. So there was a sense that there was no poetry worth of any quality up north, let's say in the region of Chihuahua, Tijuana, Baja California wasn't a state until the late 60s. And I think this is very important to address in Mexican literature, that there was recently, we have the burgeoning of la literatura del desierto, as we say, in Mexican literature parlance, of very interesting literature that comes now from the north of Mexico, and that which incorporates a Spanish that is not necessarily what's considered to be an official Spanish, but it creates a very interesting dynamic, a rich impasto within Mexican poetry. So I've really enjoyed translating poets like Roberto Castillo Uriarte, and David Shook did the wonderful favor with his press called Phony Media of translating a book called Smooth Talking Dog, El Perro Labioso. And just the title itself of labioso is an employment of slang. And then the poems that are contained within that collection contain wonderful words from the north of Mexico, like bichi. Bichi means naked, which I think comes from English for beach or other things like that. So I think really that in a sense, we do need to address that even in Mexico, there's been a division between what is considered official literature, that which is circumscribed and receiving the official seal from the capital, and that which is considered las provincias, and that was never considered to be of true quality or of merit or to be considered. What do you think, David? I don't know. I'm reaching out to you. o Jorge, porque Jorge es de Mexicali, entonces Mexicali ya estamos hablando de los lindes de la frontera mexicana, o sea, estamos hablando de ya, es como ya.
De los lindes.
Estamos llegando a Calexico, which is, I mean, Calexico, California, my God.
It's a paradise. I think you're right, Anthony. I mean, I also think it's clear you're from the Valley in these statements. You know, you're right in both cases. My answer to the question was going to be a lot more blithe. So I'm glad you answered first. I was going to say my only rule is to do it well. But Anthony brings up a really good point, and he's right. And I think one of the things that makes him so great as a translator, and especially as a translator of the literature of Northern Mexico, is the fact that he lived for so many years in Ciudad Juárez, and the fact that his partner, the fantastic short story writer Nilsa Martinez, is from Mexicali. He really knows the place. I've been at their house in Mexicali when it was 116 degrees Fahrenheit at night with no air conditioning, which tells you how much I care for Anthony. But he has been in that place. He does speak that Spanish. If you give him enough beers, he will speak it enthusiastically, and it's really wonderful.
Wonderful. I like both of those answers very much. I think that's about all we have time for. Unfortunately, there are some questions we weren't able to get to, but I think we're going to have to call it a night. I just wanted to say thank you, Elsa. Thank you, David. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Jorge. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you come and read, to talk about translation. Thank you to our audience for coming and asking so many great questions. We're hoping to do more of these sorts of programs in the future. So, hopefully we'll see all of you again sometime soon. So again, thanks so much. And I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Quentin.
Quentin.
And take care, everyone, please.
Yes, stay
Ciao.
safe out there.